Welcome to Security Heroes, a podcast by Athena Security. We share real-life stories to help connect you to real heroes in the security world. I am your host, Lisa Falzone. Warning, the following recording contains potentially disturbing content. Listener discretion advised. Joining me today is Lisa Terry, Chief Development Officer at Vistelar, a conflict management training and consulting institute. Lisa has decades of experience in the physical security sector, having started her career as a police officer in Raleigh, North Carolina, before moving on to roles such as Chief Campus Police and Public Safety at WakeMed Hospital and Director of Police at UNC Healthcare. She is an expert in the fields of crisis management, emergency management, and law protection, and is the author of Active Shooter Response Handbook for Healthcare Workers. Lisa, we are so excited to have you on. Welcome to the Security Heroes podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm absolutely pleased to be here.
Awesome. So first to start out, when did you first save a life?
Wow. I dare say that individuals who are given this wonderful opportunity to serve and protect hope that our service has positively impacted many of those lives that we've served. And it's in my hope, quite frankly, that my actions have helped to save many lives. And I've also actually honored numerous officers over the years for his or her heroic acts in the face of extreme danger. Few of them or us really want to take credit by expounding upon those actions. I will say that I've received a Medal of Valor, and I was presented with a United States flag that has flown over our Capitol for my actions on 2 separate occasions. And that's pretty much all I want to say about it. I am proud of the work that I've been privileged to do.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. Do you have a life-saving act that you're most proud of that you want to talk about?
I really do not. I can tell you many officers that have worked for me have they've done amazing things. We actually got to, I will say, when I worked with WakeMed, we went to Waveland, Mississippi, right after Katrina and set up a field hospital. And I had an emergency response team. There were 16 of us, and we took turns going 2 by 2, if you will, to provide that scene security and close quarter protection because they had no police at all. They were under martial law. So I'm very proud that we were able to protect, pharmaceuticals and nurses and physicians that were actually at the field hospital performing life-saving feats during that. It was about 50 days. So very small situation there, but something I'm very proud of.
Oh, not small at all. I mean, thank you for your service and for your team service. That's a great example. So just backing up a little bit, what was your experience as a police officer and later lieutenant in North Carolina in the 1980s? I can imagine you were one of the only females and would love to just hear about your experience doing that.
Wow. Well, I could tell you, new college graduate, I assumed when I got hired into the police department in 1982 that I was being hired into this very enlightened and welcoming environment. Not so much. Many organizations actually had been conforming to the affirmative action laws because they had to. And those of us that were some of the first women to be provided these opportunities were basically stuck in the middle. We were expected to fail, but we were forced to work twice as hard to prove our worth. Female police officer was actually expected to perform the job in exactly the same manner as her male counterparts. And a large part of that was to provide a physical presence. And for this job, the only real preparation that my college degree provided me was in report writing. I had to work out at the gym, and I ran twice a day, almost every day, just to maintain a physical presence and the ability to make it through that 4 months academy and then hopefully, maintain the job after that. It was tough, but quite honestly, failure was not an option. And I'll tell you, those early days when I entered my career field were pretty indicative of how hard I was going to work as a female in this male-dominated arena. Earn that respect, I guess, and keep it.
Yeah, that's just super impressive. I imagine it was quite lonely. And really, you're one of the innovators in that arena, being one of the first female police lieutenants probably in the US. So that's really, really awesome. Is there any kind of characteristics that you learned from maybe your childhood that made you successful?
Well, I mean, I would have to credit my mom and my dad. But
Mhm.
you start kind of there. And then I was a child of the 60s. So my mentors were Superman and the Lone Ranger. I didn't realize at the time they were fictional and that they were men, but I think
Right,
just, having that, I didn't really think there was any difference. I was the
right.
youngest of six. So, I think what I love is that we had to be physical at the beginning. That was part of the expectation. But so many women have come after me that have been innovators and
Mhm.
bring such wonderful characteristics to the job that we can do the job in many different ways now. To me, those are the innovators. We were just trying to be physical, kind of step up as a man. And it was very difficult to do that. So
Yeah. So you can just tell me if you wouldn't mind about a specific incident, or you could just general incidences in your career that created this drive in you to improve safety in the workplace.
So basically, I can tell you about. I mean, there's plenty of
Hmm.
situations, but I can tell you about one particular incident that basically happened to me at the beginning of my career, moving from the municipal world into to the hospital. And I'll tell you, I have several to choose from, but this one it occurred many years ago at the beginning. And the health system where I worked had an on-site laundry at their trauma center, and it served the entire system. The contract service provided staffing for this laundry. One of the members of that contract laundry service clocked in for work on second shift, and then he immediately left the hospital property and hid in a wooded area that bordered the city street where many of our hospital employees park. A female social worker parked there on that street that day, and her vehicle was actually the last one parked there at the end of the day. As she approached her vehicle, the male abducted her, raped, and murdered her, left her in that wooded area. He then came back to the laundry at the end of his shift and clocked out. And his supervisor never knew he'd left. And I can tell you that after we found out, we discovered who and how the murder was committed, we were able to uncover many warning signs. Perpetrator had a violent criminal history, none of which had been disclosed by the vendor to the healthcare organization. Other female contract employees had complained to their management that this individual was harassing them in the workplace. Hospital staff members had been warned and prohibited from parking on that city street, but the city police department parking control did not enforce that ordinance, nor did they even patrol the area. So, of course, individuals continue to park there.
Hmm. Wow, that's crazy. So how did you and the organization respond after that? How did they change their policies? How did you enforce different policies? How did you guys learn from it?
Well, I'll tell you a little bit more about the actual incident. How I personally responded. Later that evening, the social worker's husband actually contacted our security dispatcher and said his wife had not, arrived home. So they called me at home and I responded to the hospital. I notified our executives on call. And then we went out, my officers and I, and located her vehicle on that street. The only vehicle left. We were able to, check the tag. As soon as we did that, I coordinated with the police department's K9 unit, and we started to search that wooded area and found her body and started to work in lockstep with the homicide division for a few days, looking at video recordings, access control records, assessing individuals. There was always witnesses and reports of suspicious activity. Of course, we immediately, one of the things that we did as an organization, we increased our security staffing, shuttles, we increased walking escorts, as well as our access control on all of our campuses, not just that trauma center, to basically promote trust in the organization, the securities
Hmm.
organization. And then our COO and I conducted town halls with all of our staff. We
Hmm.
listened to their concerns and shared with them our initiatives. And at the same time, I was soliciting feedback from all the department leaders regarding any staff members who were either not reporting for work or exhibiting any suspicious behavior. And I'm going to tell you, I believe that because I was a female, I began to actually receive calls from female members of the laundry service.
Mm-hmm.
3 of these females reported to me that they had recently been raped by a male
Ooh.
coworker who was no longer showing up for work. They stated that they'd been too afraid to report it until he was no longer showing up for work in the laundry. And of course, those reports really kind of changed the whole situation with the homicide investigation. And they were able to find a suspect and make an arrest. And of course, we immediately closed the laundry and contracted with a service offsite.
Wow. Well, thank God. I mean, this is like why it's so important to have women in these positions of leadership and power, and really just like a heroic effort in bringing those stories to the surface and solving them. So thank you. Any other incidences you wanted to talk about and policy changes afterwards?
I mean, there's been lots of situations. One thing that occurred, and you don't really think about this, but the policy change was that we started an actual threat assessment team that met on
Mm-hmm.
a regular basis, like on a every 2-week basis. But we continuously had part of our organization everywhere that I've worked also had schools, medical schools, for students, and they actually worked in the hospital while they went to school. So occasionally those students might, for various reasons, be eliminated from coming back to the school or to the hospital. There was one medical student who basically, he was told not to come back to the hospital, and eventually he had to leave school. We didn't really know what was going on with him, but kind of behind the scenes, he'd been admitted to various behavioral health inpatient hospitals. He never came back as a student, but once a year we would get these threats just from an anonymous source for various deans of the schools, for just individuals that were leaders throughout the organization and in the hospital. And it would happen at a certain time of the year, and it would go on. It was always anonymous, so we really didn't know. And we really started going back once we formed this threat assessment team and looking at for the past 5 years what had happened. We found out this gentleman, these were some of the things that he was doing while he was a student at the hospital. And we also found out that he was sending $5 every year to the foundation of the hospital. And what that did is it put him in line to get these emails and newsletters. We found out that that's when he would find out who the new executives were, who the new deans were, and he was still very angry about not being allowed to come back. So we were able to start sending him thank you letters instead of putting him, on this list to receive all of this information. So the threat was the workplace violence. And I think, that's the good thing about healthcare. Joint Commission actually came out in 2021 with a definition of what is workplace violence. And threats, intimidation, bullying, not just those assaults, but all sorts of things that kind of go with that are considered workplace violence.
Totally. And you wrote a book about active shooters. Do you want to talk about any kind of active shooter incidences that either learned from, then implemented policies later, or you think you helped saved or your organization helped prevent?
So we've had, unfortunately, either active shooter events or near misses in several organizations where I've worked. One, it just so happened that it was New Year's Day, actually New Year's night, evening, and we had just opened a brand new fitness center, and it was like January 1st. They really wanted to open it that day. It was kind of a new, get everyone, really excited. So we actually just conducted, our department had conducted workplace violence and active shooter training with all of the new employees in this new space. But what happens when you have a brand new building, brand new space, there's a lot of what they call punch list items, that have not been finished. So you've got all sorts of vendors and contractors kind of there on that campus for probably a few months, kind of finishing up various things. So staff were really used to having those individuals on campus. So that's the background. So it just so happened that a gentleman had in Eastern North Carolina had I think it was either an AR-15 rifle, and he strapped it on his back. He went into a Dollar General store and just started wandering around. And of course, they called the local police. They were able to identify this individual, and he's a veteran, and pretty much told him you can't just walk around armed to the terror of the public. You need to put it in your vehicle, and he didn't have any criminal history, so they let him go, and he put it away, and it was end of the call. About 2 hours later, in another city, small town, in another Dollar General, they called the police, the local police or the sheriff's department, and there was this gentleman walking around with this AR-15 on his shoulder inside the store. So these individuals who didn't really know about the other situation identified him, found out he was a veteran. Sir, you can't walk around. You need to put it in the car. You're scaring people. Okay, no problem. So he comes on down the road. For 3 more hours. It's actually dark now. And this is all New Year's evening. The left hand doesn't know the right hand's going on. He parks in the parking lot of our fitness center that we just opened, which he could see from the interstate. He saw the big signs, with the big kind of identifying us. He pulls into the parking lot. We have plenty of cameras, which were great for later, but nobody really watching those cameras. He gets his AR. He gets a couple of handguns, 2 bags full of ammo, and decides to walk into the fitness center. But he did not want to go in the front. He wanted to kind of find another way in. And he happened to see this one door that was glass that happened to go into a break room where one of our staff members was having a break. Well, she sees this guy coming up, jeans, beard, just like many of the individuals that had been working there all week trying to finish up all of the punch slips. And she opens the door for him and she said, you need to go down those steps and into the mechanical room. You don't come in this way, you go in that way. So he agreed, and that's what he did. And as he turned, going down those steps, he notices he's got an AR-15 on his back, and it's not a typical contractor. So she locks the door, she makes the call, everybody goes into everything that we taught them. And for children, we had every kind of individual you can imagine there. But they all went into safe areas. And but the gentleman decides, he doesn't have a card to get into the maintenance store. So he takes his semi-automatic handgun and shoots the door in an entire magazine, 20 or 30 rounds that he had. It didn't open. He took another firearm and shot it. Finally, it jarred enough that he could go into that area. And of course, they've already called the police who are en route. He's found his way downstairs in the maintenance area and leaves all of his things, which we see this because of our cameras. He leaves everything in there and decides to go into the stairwell so he can see how to make his way upstairs where everybody is. So he gets into the stairwell, and then he's lost. Can't go back into the maintenance area. He can't go upstairs to the pool area. So he decides to light a fire in hope that the fire alarm will go off. So by some grace, he was separated from his firearms so that when the police came and were able to do their search of the building, they were able to take him down with a less lethal method and take him into custody. So I guess the moral of the story is I was called in. We're all kind of there after the fact because this was, off our campus. But lots of changes. Number one, everybody did exactly what they were supposed to do based on that training. They knew how to find a safe area. They knew how to lock themselves in, to barricade, to call for the police once everybody was in what they felt like as safe area as possible. And then leave once they knew the police were there and they directed them out. They didn't really know where this gentleman was, so they didn't do the run part of evacuating the building. But a lot of those changes that we were isolated. We were not working with local police.
Mm-hmm.
And quite honestly, after that, I was privileged to be a member of NFPA 3000 Technical Committee, which which was formed right after the Pulse nightclub incident. So we actually we met for 18 months to develop some good some guidelines that were, the 5,000-foot view that really helped everybody work together. So that, the first gentleman, the first officer should have maybe sent an administrative message for, 100 miles so that other police departments would know the situation occurred. So lots of things that occurred. We wanted to make sure that we brought all those cameras, from an IP standpoint back to a centralized security operations center, because they were not at that time. We didn't see that as being, as violent as another area. So just lots of training, lots of things that changed that whole setup.
That's amazing. I mean, not amazing that it happened, but what a crazy story, and really great what you put in place. It seems like with the shooter being caught in the stairwell, it seems like that access control is pretty key to kind of de-escalating the situation. And honestly, that was one of the reasons why we got into this industry, was looking at these cameras and saying, okay, well, the crime is being caught on camera, but like it's just after the fact, right? You're not doing anything to stop it. So it's really cool that you guys then centralized it, and then probably got someone watching it to then look at it and say, hey, here's an alert, and work with the police officers around the area. So
something that is important to me is, if you're going to have some of these, either metal detection or any type of weapons detection, you can't just say this is the only place individuals with a firearm are going to enter the building is that emergency department or that main entrance. And I think you've really got to think through, if someone is coming to do harm, they're going to look for that area, just like this gentleman did, that he can sneak in and find a way to get to where the most number of people are.
Yeah, I mean, we recommend obviously doing metal detection or concealed weapon detection at every single entrance, even employee entrances. It's amazing. That is where a lot of crime is happening, not just in hospitals, but other
Absolutely
other places too. So yeah, I mean, just thank you so much for your service again. It's just it's just really heroic hearing these stories. It's very inspiring. So just to change the subject a little bit, we can kind of go back to specific incidences if you want to. But what tech are you currently working with that you feel will improve security while also representing a better ROI for the organizations?
So I personally continue to work with not only weapons detection, but also incident tracking and reporting technology. I feel like those are how we really can compare and contrast. You always need analytics. You need to have some metrics. So one of the things that I've found success in is I track security incidents, then the workers' comp claims for workplace violence. Those claims that are, specifically, I didn't just fall, but I was hit or whatever. And then there's a few other risk factors. So once you have those and you track them over time, then I'll add in whatever mitigation actions based on those risk factors. And that may include additional weapons detection, change security staffing, enhanced non-escalation and conflict management training, as well as other physical improvements or technology based improvements. And you'll track those and the risks over time. And then, quite honestly, I've seen significant improvement after those technology solutions and various training has been added.
Yeah, you're speaking our language. I mean, we're a big fan of incident reporting and connecting that with the weapons detection and looking at all those analytics and then being in front of the problem rather than after the problem. So what is your hope for the future of tackling workplace violence, and how can it be improved?
Well, we live in a violent society. Sometimes, I mean, I love being an American, but sometimes, traveling to other countries, I'm a little embarrassed because they all know everything, I guess, because of social media and just, they know what's going on here. So I think in healthcare, we've got to respond to it in a very multifaceted manner. It's my hope that we and some of our regulatory partners continue to respond by hardening the physical space, as well as perpetuating this nonviolent, respectful culture as another tool in our belts. So hopefully we can prevent and mitigate some of the clinical and even the clinical criminal aggression in the healthcare environment. I mean, sometimes because of our ignorance, and I'm talking about myself, we can perpetuate behavior, not intentionally. So I think it's important that.
How so?
Well, if you really are, if someone doesn't, you feel like that if you're feeling disrespected Or if you're, for instance, and I'm talking more in a clinical situation, if I come in and I've been waiting for 5 hours and I feel that nobody's really listening to me, or someone speaks to me in a manner that is disrespectful, then I'm going to be very defensive. And
Right.
so I think it's very important that we really push. I'm all about hardening that physical space, but I really want to make sure that we in healthcare take those extra steps to not escalate, to be respectful, and to talk with individuals in such a way that we're empathetic. I think there's a few corporations out there that you feel good after going there, or when
Hmm.
someone says "my pleasure," you're just like, okay, wow, thank you, I'll be
Hmm.
back. And so I think
Right.
something can really change that.
Yeah, I think that empathetic approach is so key because it's like you don't want to be an asshole and then that creates another asshole and then it just keeps escalating. And you do see that, right? In security. So yeah, I think just like a more empathetic approach, which I'm sure your influence in the industry has helped with that. So yeah, I think that's really cool. So yeah, so just in closing, I mean, who in the world of security would you like to take to lunch?
Oh, wow. So I've always been a student of national and global security. So my first choice would have been the U.S. Secretary of State, and he's retired four-star general, and that would have been Colin Powell. But unfortunately,
Mhm.
he is deceased. So my second choice, I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she's a U.S. Air Force retired four-star general, and her name is Lori Robinson. Her journey in the 1980s, quite honestly, was a little bit like my own. We both started in ROTC in college. And one
Mhm.
of the things that I like about her is it's a quote, and just kind of bear with me. I do want to read this. Is our nation needs diverse voices around the table, whether it's a CEO's table, a joint chiefs table, or the cabinet of the United States. The diversity of thought, background, heritage, race, and gender will all add to the capability of any leader to make a decision. It makes our nation stronger and better. I love learning, and me, diversity is what makes us all stronger.
That's awesome. Totally agree. If you had one piece of advice or one guiding principle every organization should abide by when thinking about their workplace security processes, what would it be?
So I think that I would say to value continued learning no matter what, and that means fund it if you're in a position to fund it, and also promote. And again, that could mean fund, but enable your staff to live what I call left of bang. If you're not familiar with that, a book that was written by a couple of individuals in the Marines,
Mhm.
took some of the combat language, but they wrote it in a way that it applies to everyone. And basically, left of bang, bang is that event. It could be that workplace violence situation. It could be an explosion. It could be just as simple as someone getting upset. And you want to live so that you are prepared for that. Left of bang are those proactive activities and actions that you take. So hopefully you can avoid bang. And right of bang, unfortunately, a lot of us, and some of us are always going to be right of bang, but hopefully that you learn so that you back left of bang, so that you rarely end up right of bang. And that's simplifying it, but I think really kind of promoting a type of proactive
Mhm.
behavior.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the disappointing things we see in organizations is that there's usually the funding for security and new security tech or more security personnel after the incident. So it's like how to convince organizations to let's not have an incident. Let's put these things proactively in place so we can, prevent it. I think I mean, if you want to talk about that in your career and how you kind of sell that to the organization to be more proactive.
So my success has been really going back to metrics and
Mhm.
being able to understand how to analyze those, because it all comes down to the budget and an ROI, and who needs those dollars the most, and how can we show the value for that. In healthcare, I think you look at patient, how does that patient, what's the positive thing? What's their outcome? Regardless of how they come in there, they have to measure a patient's outcomes. And being a part of that healthcare environment, you have to be able to speak that language. So if it's security, you've got to be able to understand how to measure outcomes. And doing that is really, as I said, using that those metrics and that data over time, and showing, for instance, the workplace violence program should be looking at those injuries. How much does it cost for someone to be recruited? A nurse, it's $50,000 to or more. That's an average to recruit a nurse. If she leaves based on workplace violence, it's going to cost the organization. And if you have 20 of those leave in a year, that's huge. And forget it if it's a physician. And many physicians kind of feel that same way. So I think that has been something that has always helped me, is getting down and looking at the numbers, because it is a business no matter where we are.
Yeah, we had I don't know if you know her, Mel Cortez from Cortez Gold on here last week, and she was a nurse, and her whole thing is training the nurses to de-escalate, which I thought was crazy. I'm like, how are we in a place where these poor nurses are having to deal with violence issues? So
I think they've really been dealing with it for many years. One of the things, some organizations will, they say they have a zero tolerance for violence, but basically there will be some patient-generated violence. It's just the nature of the business, but it should not be accepted. We've got to make sure that everyone's trained, number one, how to hopefully non-escalate. It shouldn't be to the point, it may be the officer that's outside that said something that made someone mad, or, the receptions or whomever. But hopefully we can all be speaking from the same sheet of music, and how we speak to one another, and have that whole culture through the organization. And be a team, security, and we all should be a part of that patient care team. Everybody should be on the same side.
Totally. And I mean, you guys are heroes, just like those nurses and the doctors, saving people's lives. I mean, your security teams are saving people's lives as well. So, that's what we want to recognize and highlight. It's interesting because it's, in the news, it's like health. And we were really surprised with this when we got in the industry that, healthcare really is just so much violence is happening. But people don't really know about it because it's not really in the news. But as opposed to school shootings, which are also horrific, but it's all, all across the news. And the healthcare, it's like people don't really realize how much violence is happening in healthcare. So, yeah. So hopefully
I think there's that clinical aggression, and sometimes that can move into criminal aggression. But I think, we're a violent society. So you've got to physically harden where you're conducting patient care. That is just, we have to do that in our society. But also inside, there's that, what I would call that insider threat. Not the typical insider threat, but it could be employee to, supervisor, or supervisor to employee, or, it could be person to person, or patient to a lot of patient generated violence for whatever reason. So we've got to be trained. We've got to continuously give all of our staff those tools to meet those threats and that violence, because it's not just the outside coming in, it's also inside.
Yeah. And just for clarification, for people not in the security world, when you say harden the security, harden the entryway, can you just define what you mean by that?
Well, and there's lots of, I'm a longtime supporter of IHSS and the guidelines, and we work with the Facility Guideline Institute, as well as NFPA, all of these regulatory and these associations that help you understand how to physically have better lighting, how to physically build your emergency department or your behavioral health department or your entrances so that there are bollards so vehicles can't drive through, so that you have gates, access control outside that would keep a big vehicle, or that would keep individuals like the gentleman I spoke about trying to enter a door, that he really isn't authorized to do that. In some urban areas, we've had to actually install ballistic glass in some of those areas, just not necessarily because people are trying to shoot into the hospital, but it could be a stray bullet that
Mhm.
has broken a window. So based on your risk assessment and your threat assessment, which are two different things, you really need to look at how you physically can harden that target or harden that building. And that includes technology.
Yeah.
That's one of those additions: cameras, access control, weapons detection.
Mhm. Yeah. And also, can you just define what the difference is between the risk assessment and the assessment, which you just mentioned?
Absolutely. So risk assessment has to go. You look at your full environment, your full community, and what are those risks? How close are you to uh, a transit station? How close are you to railroads? How close is your building to certain venues where hundreds of thousands of people gather?
Mhm.
And so it has to kind of start from the outside in, and you look at how do this is where I'm located.
Mhm.
Am I in a very rural area? Am I in a very urban area? Where am I located, and what are those risks? And take into consideration, what am I delivering? Am I a pain clinic? What are those risks associated?
Oops, you're cutting out. I can hear you now, I think.
So you can hear now?
Yeah.
All right. So being able to look at all of those risks as you're deciding where do you fit, it's kind of like a green, yellow, red.
Mm.
What should we do for our building?
Yeah.
And the threat assessment really looks at, or a threat management program, again, what are the services that you're delivering?
Mhm.
How many employees do you have? How many are they parking off campus? Or the whole scenario. And some of those risks could be something that we really don't have any control over. If it's a level 1 trauma center, then certain types of patients in the public are going to come to that location regardless. That's a risk that you've got to be aware of, but you can't really control. And then what are those risks that organizational, do we have the right policies and processes to make sure that we're doing the right things?
Mhm.
So when you're looking at your threat management program, you really have to look at more internally, and then how do we respond to that?
No,
And
that makes sense. Yeah.
it's ongoing. It's as I said, you really want to be looking at those because it changes. It's fluid. It may
Totally.
be, you have one patient that's wants to fight every day, or sometimes there are patients that will be staying in the emergency department for a long time, waiting for a bed, perhaps in a behavioral health hospital, and there's
Mhm.
none available, because that in itself is another crisis. So a normal individual is going to act out in those types of situations. So just kind of looking from the outside in, and then
Right.
looking from inside out.
Thank you so much for that explanation.
Absolutely.
Let's just say I'm a 20-year-old, I'm in ROTC, I'm in college. I'm looking at what to do afterwards. How would you encourage me to get into the physical security industry? And what are the positives?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I think you've really got to decide what is your love, number one,
Mhm.
and do you have, an affinity for, I would say, engineering? Do you like to look at how to solve issues? If so, the industry it's wide open, and it's every day something else is being developed. You can look at what's the absolute best thing we could do, whether that's national security, or whether that's security for university, a hospital, and how would we resolve it? Just put down, kind of wave a magic wand, and then kind of work toward with, is there a company out there that is developing and open to new ideas? Because in my opinion, the technology is there. It's just a
Mhm.
matter of where we go with it. AI is scary, but it's the future, and how
Mhm.
we harness that is, I think for young people, that's kind of the next step.
Yeah, I love that you're an innovator in the security industry. It seems like a lot of security people can be risk averse, and I just love when I get to talk to people that are in the security industry and they, want to see new ideas, want to, aren't afraid of, like you said, AI. And where would you encourage people to go that are interested in, innovating and also interested in innovating and being a part of implementing innovative tools in the physical security industry?
Well, I have personally found that smaller companies are a little, when I say smaller, I don't mean super small, but mid-sized companies are a little more open to innovation. I think it's certainly, I think your larger companies may have the backing, but it's a little more difficult to change. It's like turning the ship around. It's a really big ship. It's a little more difficult. So what I've seen is they're not afraid of failing or succeeding when you're a little smaller in that space. That's been, and yes, we all want to make $1 million, but I think you've really got it. The money will come. Go with your heart and where you feel like your gifts are. And then, salary will be there.
I love that. Well, I mean, it's just been an absolute honor to talk to you. You have absolutely a fabulous career. I feel like I could talk to you for hours on all the heroic acts you've done. Is there anything else you want to talk about, or just any other, anything else from your amazing career that you want to highlight?
Well, I'm grateful. I think, again, I go back to starting out in the business. It was not my dream. I really wanted to go into law school. That was where I was headed. My son, I think I've lived vicariously through him. He and his wife are both attorneys now. So I don't know if maybe I pushed them to do what I didn't do, but I found my love through that journey. And just because it doesn't start out in the way that you imagined, I think, it's just been great to go with it and kind of see what's there and connect with people all over the world. I've been very fortunate to be able to do that throughout my career and learn so much.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining Security Heroes. And again, you're a hero, and just thank you so much for everything you've done and all the lives you've saved.
It's great. Thank you so much.
Security Heroes is brought to you by Athena Security. To find out more about Athena Security and how we help save lives through our weapon detection solution, visit www.athena-security.com. And then make sure to search for Security Heroes in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Athena, thanks for listening.